Special counsel Jack Smith is telling Republicans, game on. In a letter just released from his attorneys to Congressman Jim Jordan and Senator Chuck Grassley, the chairs of the House and Senate Judiciary Committee, Jack Smith is offering to testify, but he wants to do so in a public hearing about the investigations he conducted. Jack Smith's attorneys writing this, quote, given the many mischaracterizations of Mr. Smith's investigation into President Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents and his role in attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 election, Mr. Smith respectfully requests the opportunity to testify in open hearings before the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. Jack Smith's team added just one caveat, quote, he's prepared to answer questions about the special counsel's investigation and prosecution, but he requires assurance from the Department of Justice that he will not be punished for doing so. Jack Smith is making this offer to testify in full view publicly because and after Republicans have alleged for weeks now that Jack Smith's team unlawfully tapped the phone records of members of Congress who may have had a role in Trump's effort to overturn his 2020 election defeat. On that issue, Jack Smith defended his team and his investigation in a letter to Republicans on Tuesday. He writes this, quote, as described by various senators, the toll data collection was narrowly tailored and limited to the 4 days from January 4th, 2021 to January 7th, 2021, with a focus on telephonic activity during the period immediately surrounding the January 6 riots at the U.S. Capitol. The subpoena's limited temporal range is consistent with a focused effort to confirm or refute reports by multiple news outlets that during and after the January 6 riots at the Capitol, President Trump and his surrogates attempted to call senators to urge them to delay certification of the 2020 election results. In other words, Jack Smith, the investigator, was doing what investigators do. He was doing his job, investigating efforts by Donald Trump to get his allies to stop the election from being certified. The attacks from Republicans are part of a steady but increasingly loud drumbeat to target people on Donald Trump's enemies list. And of course, the only federal prosecutor to indict Donald Trump and indict him twice is high on Donald Trump's list. Jack Smith, for his part, has been increasingly public about what he is watching happen to the Justice Department in which he served and to the rule of law more broadly in this country under Donald Trump. Here's what he said back in September about the pardons of those who stormed the U.S. Capitol. It's video first obtained by The Bulwark.
Trying to stop the democratic process, trying to stop the lawful transfer of power, vandalizing our Capitol, intimidating lawmakers, and assaulting police officers. This is among 1,500 pardons that were granted in January of this year. They were pardoned by the president because they committed their crimes in his name and in his interest.
They committed their crimes in his name and in his interest. Special counsel Jack Smith speaking out about the rule of law and against Donald Trump is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Mark Harris is here, former senior investigative counsel for the House Select Committee on January 6th, joins us. New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is here. My friend and colleague, MSNBC senior political analyst and contributing host to Pod Save America, Alex Wagner, is with me at the table for the hour. Her new weekly podcast, Runaway Country, premieres today. So excited about that. We'll save some time to talk about it.
Thank you, my friend.
Glenn Thrush, let me start with you. Jack Smith, you and I think were on the air together when we first heard his voice in a public interview. It was a conversation with my colleague, Andrew Weissman, who was one of the first people to investigate Team Trump and the Mueller probe. What do you make of this? I'll call it a salvo, back to Jim Jordan. Yeah, I'll testify, but I'm going to do it in public with the lights on and cameras rolling and public witnesses.
I will invoke my tabloid past and say, Jack doesn't want to go in the box.
I love that.
I just had to get that out there.
That's good. Thank you.
Well, look, we've known for a really long time that Jordan and the House Republicans do not want Jack Smith testifying in public. So to some extent, this is kind of a chess move in order to sort of keep them from doing what they did to a couple of the people with whom he worked, Tom Windham and another former one of his staffers. So what he wants to do is have his voice heard in public. He does not want to give Jim Jordan and the House Republicans the opportunity to distort what he says or even to characterize what he says. And I think what we're seeing here is an evolution of Smith from being a guy who realized that silence when he was in the employ of the Department of Justice was his guiding principle and his friend, to realizing now that he's in an entirely different environment. Books are coming out that are going to be discussing what he has done. Republicans are attempting on various fronts, both in Congress and in the Department of Justice, to accuse him of doing a politicized investigation. And I think he realizes that if he does not speak out and if he does not represent himself, he is going to be in a considerable amount of trouble. So to some extent, Smith, who is a guy who got the job initially as special counsel because he was viewed as an expediter, as somebody who was impatient to take action in whatever he did, whether he was going to decline a prosecution or proceed with the prosecution. You're seeing that same level of grabbing the bull by the horns.
Mark, let me play you some of this evolution that Glenn describes from Mueller-like, in Jack Smith's own telling, to reading the room in very much a similar journey, I think, that President Obama, in a different context, in a ex-president context, has articulated, from not speaking out very often, picking his moments. He's now one of the tips of the spear in protecting democracy and involving himself and encouraging people to get off the sidelines. Jack Smith, in some ways, has taken a legal journey that parallels that. Let me play you his explanation.
The Robert Mueller view of how to do this, that's where I come from. That's my view, and that's really how the Department of Justice does it, I've seen throughout my career. And there's a reason for it. The reason is you do not want to be saying things before a trial that are going to make it hard for the defendant to get a fair trial, right? You don't want to be sort of polluting the jury pool in your favor, saying things that they, because the usual case is a case where the government has a lot of power and has a megaphone, and the defendant most often doesn't. And so those rules, that way of doing things, has been a department tradition. And in fact, a lot of the local rules of the courts that we practice in limit what you can say as a prosecutor. And so in my role as special counsel, I handled things very much as I did throughout my career. It's like we often say, do your talking in the courtroom, not on the courthouse steps. And so that's how I did things. I think that it is worth a conversation going forward about how we move things and how we handle things and how we think about these things. Now, I'm not arguing in favor of a sort of wholesale, one side blasts something out on social media and then the other side does, and we do that sort of thing. But I do think we need to think about it differently, because we're in a different age now and we communicate with each other differently.
Mark, I don't know what was on his mind there, but one of the failures of the public's understanding of the Mueller investigation is that the public has no understanding of the substance of the Mueller investigation. One of the successes of the congressional probe into January 6th is that it was so effective at informing the public, with Democratic and Republican members of Congress helping to do the storytelling, helping to elicit truthful testimony out of witnesses, all of whom were in Donald Trump's inner circle, none of whom were anti-Trump figures. Some of them were out of the arena, law enforcement. But tell me what you think of this sort of public rumbling with how to communicate about, one, Donald Trump's conduct around January 6th, and two, this moment we're in now.
Well, I agree with what Glenn mentioned it earlier and what Jack Smith said in that interview, that the tendency for federal prosecutors in particular in the Department of Justice that I'm familiar with, I spent many years as a federal prosecutor, and I've been, even since I've left the U.S. Attorney's Office, interacting with federal prosecutors for decades. And the ethos is to let the facts in court do the talking. That's for reasons, as Jack Smith mentioned in that interview, that you don't want to poison the case, but it's also just not what we do. And so I understand the reticence. I understand the fact that that he referred to, or you referred to as the Mueller approach, is sort of the way things have been done in the past. I won't speak for Jack Smith. I've never met him. I don't know him. I don't know why he's taking the position he's taking. But I do know that a lot of federal prosecutors who are used to that, former federal prosecutors who are used to that approach, are revisiting it and thinking, we do need to get the story out. And that's why you're seeing multiple times in the last several months, letters signed by hundreds, if not thousands, of former prosecutors to speak out about the attack on the rule of law and so forth. And this latest effort by Jim Jordan, who, by the way, refused to comply with the subpoena to come talk to Congress when he was asked and had relevant information in connection with January 6th, I think really did call out for some type of response to set the record straight on this ridiculous claim of wiretapping of GOP senators.